10,000 feet below the Antarctic ice. Something is moving in the darkness. Wait, ... What is that? There's something down here, ... March 5th, 2022. The Weddell Sea, Antarctica, the deep, coldest search in history after 107 years beneath the ice. Shackleton's legendary ship, the Endurance, has finally been found. But what the underwater robots discovered on the ocean floor tells a story more extraordinary than anyone imagined. This is the tale of 28 men who faced impossible odds, and the modern mission that brought their story back from the depths. March 2022. A team of international explorers descends into one of Earth's most hostile environments, the Weddell Sea. Their target lies nearly 2 miles beneath the surface, in water so cold they can freeze exposed skin in under 3 minutes. For 17 days, autonomous underwater vehicles scan the pitch-black depths, searching through a graveyard of ice and sediment. Each pass covers only a fraction of the search area. Each dive risks losing equipment worth millions. Then, on day 17, at exactly 9,869 feet below the surface, the cameras capture something that shouldn't exist. A ship perfectly preserved, impossibly intact. The name is still visible on the stern. Clear. Undeniable. Endurance. After more than a century trapped beneath the Antarctic ice, Ernest Shackleton's ship looked as if it sank yesterday. The wooden hull stands firm. The rigging remains in place. Even to ship S-wheel sits frozen exactly as it was abandoned in 1915. Ships do UNT survive like this? Not at these depths, not after 107 years in the most violent ocean on Earth. But the ship's remarkable preservation isn't the strangest part of this discovery, because scattered around the wreck, the cameras picked up something else. Movement. Shadows passing just beyond the lights. Objects that appeared on sonar but vanished when the cameras turned toward them. The expedition team couldn't explain it, and perhaps they weren't meant to. To understand what those robots found in 2022, we need to travel back to 1915. Back to one of the most audacious and doomed expeditions in human history. Back to a dream that turned into a nightmare. January 1st, 1915. British explorer Sir Ernest Shackleton stands on the deck of the Enduring in Plymouth Harbor, preparing to attempt the impossible, to be the first human being to cross the entire Antarctic continent on foot. At 40 years old, Shackleton had already failed once before. In 1909, he'd come within 97 miles of the South Pole, so close he could almost taste victory before turning back to save his men. As lives. That decision haunted him. This time would be different. This time he would succeed, or Dietring. Shackleton handpicked 27 men for the journey. Scientists, sailors, adventurers. Each one chosen not just for their skills, but for their ability to endure the unendurable. Because Shackleton knew something the public didn't. Antarctica doesn't forgive mistakes. The Endurance was a marvel of engineering. 3-masted wooden bark, reinforced for ice, 144 feet long, built from oak, green heart, and Norwegian pine. Strong enough, they thought, to withstand anything the Antarctic could throw at it. They were wrong. Within 3 weeks of entering the Weddell Sea, the Endurance encountered something no one had predicted. The Antarctic winter had arrived early, and with it came a wall of pack ice unlike anything the crew had ever seen. The ice didn't just surround the ship, it seized it like a living predator. The frozen sea closed around the Endurance and refused to let go. January 24th, 1915. The engines fell silent. The ship stopped moving, and Shackleton realized with growing dread that they were trapped. Not for days, not for weeks. For months, the men tried everything. They sawed through the ice. They used explosives. They waited for the summer thaw that never came. But Antarctica had made its decision. For 10 long months, the Endurance drifted helplessly across the frozen ocean, imprisoned in a moving ice field that stretched to the horizon in every direction. The men established a routine. They hunted seals and penguins. They played football on the ice. They celebrated birthdays and holidays. They tried desperately to maintain normalcy in the most abnormal situation imaginable. But beneath the surface, everyone knew the truth. The ice was getting stronger. The pressure was increasing. And the ship was dying. October 24th, 1915. The ice pressure is growing tremendous. The ship groans and cracks through the night. Today we heard sounds like heavy gunfire as the beams begin to give way. We can do nothing but wait. 3 days later, the ice delivered its verdict. October 27th, 1915. The pressure became too much. The Endurance's wooden hull, built to withstand the worst seas on Earth, began to splinter like kindling under the crushing weight of millions of tons of ice. Shackleton's men watched in horror as their ship, their home, their shelter, their only hope of escape was slowly torn apart by forces beyond human comprehension. For 3 weeks, the Endurance fought back. The wood screamed. The metal buckled. The ship tilted at impossible angles as the ice lifted it, crushed it, and finally broke it. November 21st, 1915, 5 p.m. The Endurance disappeared beneath the ice and sank into the black water below. 28 men stood on the frozen ocean, watching their ship vanish into the depths. They were 1,200 miles from the nearest human settlement. No radio. No rescue. No ship. No one in the outside world even knew they were in trouble. The temperature was 20 degrees below zero and dropping, and night was falling. The expedition was over. The dream was dead. Now Shackleton had a new mission. Get every single man home alive. For the first month, Shackleton hoped the ice itself might save them. Ocean currents could potentially carry the drifting ice floes north toward Paulet Island, where old expedition supply depots might still have food and shelter. But Paulet Island was 250 miles away, and after weeks of drifting, they'd moved less than 30 miles. They were going nowhere. Slowly. December 1915. Shackleton made a decision that would define his leadership forever. They would march across the ice, dragging their 3 salvaged lifeboats and supplies, and make their own way to safety. What followed was a journey into hell. The ice was a nightmare landscape of broken ridges, crevasses, and pressure fields that rose 30 feet high. The men hauled their boats up and over these obstacles, only to find more waiting on the other side. The surface would suddenly turn to slush, plunging them waist-deep into freezing seawater. Men fell through hidden cracks. Equipment was lost. Progress was measured in yards, not miles. After 7 days of brutal marching, they'd covered less than 9 miles. Shackleton called a halt. They would camp and drift, conserving strength, waiting for the ice to break up. But survival came with impossible costs. Food supplies were running critically low. The men were burning thousands of calories every day just staying warm. But their rations had dwindled to almost nothing. Shackleton gave an order that broke hearts across the camp. Shoot the sled dogs. Some of those dogs had been with the expedition for over a year. They had names, personalities. They'd pulled sleds, provided warmth, lifted morale. Now they became food. The psychological toll was devastating. Men began to crack. Arguments erupted. The ship's carpenter, Harry McNish, openly challenged Shackleton's authority, arguing that without a ship, Shackleton was no longer their captain. Shackleton's response was calm but absolute. Discipline isn't about rank. It's about survival. Without order, we all die. McNish backed down, but the incident showed how close they were to the edge. For 4 more months, they drifted, camping on ice floes that cracked beneath them without warning, watching the endless white horizon, hoping for land that never appeared, wondering if they would be the first Antarctic expedition where everyone simply disappeared. Then, on April 9th, 1916, everything changed. The ice beneath their camp began to break apart. Not slowly, violently. Cracks shot through the ice like lightning. Floes tilted and collided. Men grabbed equipment and ran as their world literally fell apart beneath their feet. Shackleton gave the order they'd been dreading for months. Launch the boats. What followed was 7 days of pure survival horror. The 3 lifeboats, named James Caird, the Dudley Docker, and the Stancomb Wills were launched into seas that could kill you in minutes. Waves the size of buildings crashed over the tiny vessels. The men were instantly soaked to the bone, and in Antarctic waters, their clothes froze solid within minutes. They rode through day and night. No rest, no warmth, no hope of rescue. On the second night, during a violent storm, the Dudley Docker vanished into the darkness. Shackleton thought he'd lost 8 men. For 2 agonizing days, the remaining boats searched, calling into the storm, finding nothing but empty sea. Then, on the 3rd day, a shape emerged from the mist. The Dudley Docker. Every man aboard alive. Against impossible odds, all 3 boats had survived. April 15th, 1916. After 7 days at sea, after 497 days since the Endurance was first trapped in ice, the men finally saw something other than frozen ocean. Land. Elephant Island, a desolate, rocky outcrop at the edge of the world. But it was solid ground, real land. The first they'd stood on in over 16 months. The men collapsed on the beach. Some kissed the rocks. Others simply lay there, too exhausted to move. They had survived, but they weren't saved, because Elephant Island wasn't rescue. It was just another kind of prison, a prison from which there was only one escape. Elephant Island was uninhabited, remote. No shipping lanes passed within 500 miles. No rescue ships would ever find them here. Shackleton faced a devastating reality. If he didn't go for help, every single man would die on this frozen rock. The nearest help was 800 miles away, across the most violent ocean on the planet, during the Antarctic winter. 800 miles in a 22-foot wooden lifeboat. 6 men. No engine, no radio, no margin for error. It was nautical suicide. Shackleton chose the strongest of the 3 lifeboats, the James Caird, ordered carpenter Harry McNish to make it seaworthy for the impossible journey ahead. McNish was a genius with wood, using salvaged materials, scraps of canvas, and even sealed blood mixed with lamp oil to waterproof the seams. He transformed the lifeboat into something that might survive the voyage. Shackleton selected 5 men to sail with him. Frank Worth, the navigator whose skill with a sextant would mean the difference between reaching land and sailing into oblivion. Tom Crean, the Irish seaman who'd already survived 2 Antarctic expeditions. Timothy McCarthy, the strongest sailor on the crew. John Vincent and Harry McNish, men who'd caused trouble during the ice drift. Shackleton wanted them close, under his direct supervision. To the 22 men who would remain behind, Shackleton made a promise. "Keep yourselves alive. I will return for you." Then he added something that would haunt him for the rest of the journey. "If I do, you won't come back. Don't wait. Do what you must to survive." April 24th, 1916, 12:30 p.m. The James Caird pushed away from Elephant Island and disappeared into the gray, endless ocean. The men left behind watched until the tiny boat vanished completely. Some of them wondered if they'd ever see Shackleton again. What happened over the next 16 days and 800 miles is considered the greatest small boat voyage in maritime history. The James Caird sailed directly into the worst seas on Earth. Waves 60 feet high crashed over the tiny boat constantly. The men were never dry, never warm, never safe for even a moment. Ice formed on the sails, threatening to capsize them. They took turns chipping it away with frozen, bleeding hands. They took turns at the helm, 3 hours on, 3 hours huddled in the tiny enclosed section of the boat, trying desperately to rest, but never quite succeeding because the boat was constantly being thrown around like a toy. They were always soaked, always freezing, always hungry, always certain that the next wave would be the one that rolled them over and sent them to the bottom. On day 12, John Vincent collapsed. The constant cold and exposure had broken him. He could no longer help with the sailing. The other 5 men would have to compensate. On day 14, all of them began experiencing hallucinations from exhaustion and dehydration. Men saw ships that weren't there, heard voices calling from the water, and through it all, Frank Worsley performed miracles. Navigation in these conditions was nearly impossible. Worsley needed clear sky to sight the sun with his sextant and calculate their position. In 16 days, he got exactly 4 brief glimpses of the sun between storms. For chances to get it right, if his calculations were off by even 1 degree, they would miss South Georgia Island completely and sail into the Atlantic Ocean forever. For 2 weeks, they sailed through hell, trusting their lives to mathematics and Worsley's skill. Then, on May 8, 1916, after 16 days at sea, Frank Worsley saw something through the fog that made him weep. Land. South Georgia Island, exactly where it should be. Against impossible odds, they had done it, but their ordeal wasn't over. A hurricane hit before they could land. For 24 hours, it pinned them offshore, threatening to destroy them within sight of salvation. Waves battered the tiny boat. The men bailed water continuously, too exhausted to think, operating on pure survival instinct. Later, they would learn that the same storm sank a 500-ton steel whaling ship just miles away. Somehow, the James Caird survived. May 10th, 1916. 6 men stumbled onto the rocky beach of South Georgia Island. They were unrecognizable, gaunt, filthy, barely alive, but they were on land. And then they looked around and realized their final, impossible challenge. They'd landed on the wrong side of the island. The whaling stations were 26 miles away, across the interior of South Georgia, a maze of unmapped mountains, glaciers, and ice fields that no human had ever crossed. The James Caird was too damaged to sail again. 3 men would have to make the crossing on foot. 3 exhausted, starving men with no map, no equipment, and no room for error. May 19th, 1916, 3 a.m. Shackleton, Worsley, and Tom Crean began their march across South Georgia Island. They had no map, no climbing equipment, just 50 feet of rope, a carpenter's adze for an ice axe, and screws hammered into their boot soles for traction. What they did over the next 36 hours has never been repeated. They climbed mountains in the dark. They slid down ice slopes thousands of feet long, gambling that there wasn't a cliff at the bottom. They marched through blizzards that reduced visibility to 0. They didn't stop. Couldn't stop, because 22 men were waiting on Elephant Island, and every hour of delay brought them closer to death. All 3 men later reported the same strange phenomenon during the crossing. They felt as though a 4th person was walking with them, an invisible presence, a guardian watching over them. They never spoke about it during the journey, but all 3 felt it. Climbers call it the third man factor, a phenomenon reported in extreme survival situations, a comforting hallucination brought on by exhaustion, or maybe something more. May 20th, 1916, 3 p.m. 3 men stumbled into the Stromness whaling station. They were unrecognizable. Their clothes were in tatters. Their faces were blackened by frostbite and soot. Their hair and beards were matted with ice and dirt. The station manager stared at them, unable to comprehend what he was seeing. Finally, one of the figures spoke. "My name is Ernest Shackleton." The manager's face went white. The endurance expedition had been given up for lost over a year ago. He was looking at ghosts. Within hours, a ship was dispatched to rescue the 3 men left on the other side of South Georgia. They were safe. But Shackleton's mission wasn't complete. 22 men still waited on Elephant Island, and now came the hardest part. Getting back through the ice. Over the next 4 months, Shackleton made 4 separate rescue attempts. Each time, pack ice blocked the approach to Elephant Island. Each time, he was forced to turn back. The guilt consumed him. He'd promised to return. He'd given his word, and he was failing. First attempt, May 23rd. Turned back by ice 70 miles from Elephant Island. Second attempt, June 10th. A storm damaged the ship. Turned back. Third attempt, July 21st. Heavy ice. No way through. By August, Shackleton was barely holding himself together. He was convinced his men were dead, that he'd come all this way, survived the impossible, only to fail at the final moment. But he wouldn't give up. He couldn't. August 30th, 1916. Fourth attempt. This time, the ice parted. The ship broke through to Elephant Island. Through his binoculars, Shackleton counted the figures on the beach. 1, 2, 3, 4, ... 22. Every single man alive. When Shackleton came ashore, his first words were, "Are you all well?" Frank Weil, who'd kept the men alive for 137 days on that desolate rock, simply replied, "All safe, all well. Not one life lost. Over 634 days since the Endurance was first trapped in ice. All 28 men returned home. It remains one of the greatest feats of leadership and survival in human history." But the story doesn't end with the rescue. Many of the crew returned to find their lives destroyed. World War I had ravaged Europe. Some had lost their homes. Others found that loved ones had moved on, believing them dead. The expedition had saved their lives, but the world they returned to was broken. Shackleton himself never fully recovered. The expedition had taken everything from him: his health, his money, his reputation as a successful explorer. 6 years later, in 1922, while preparing another Antarctic expedition, Ernest Shackleton died of a heart attack at age 47. His wife requested he be buried on South Georgia Island, the place of his greatest triumph. His grave remains there, today, overlooking the frozen seas he loved and feared, a guardian watching over the ice forever. For 107 years, the Endurance remained lost beneath the ice, the greatest shipwreck that no one could find, until 2022. A team of international explorers, scientists, and marine archaeologists launched what would become the most ambitious underwater search in history. The Endurance 22 expedition cost over $250 million and took 2 years to plan. They faced the same brutal conditions Shackleton had encountered a century before: shifting ice, deadly cold, and water so deep and hostile that a single equipment failure could end everything. But they had something Shackleton didn't: Frank Worsley's incredibly detailed ship logs, which gave the exact coordinates where the Endurance sank. The team deployed autonomous underwater vehicles, robots, that could withstand the crushing pressure and freezing temperatures at depth. For weeks, they scanned mile after mile of seafloor. Then came disaster. 30 hours into a deep dive, they lost contact with their primary OV. It simply vanished, potentially destroyed, potentially lost forever, along with all the data it had collected. The ice was closing in. Weather was deteriorating. The team faced the same decision Shackleton had made a century before: push forward and risk everything, or retreat and live to try again. They chose survival. 3 years later, with better equipment and better planning, Tay returned, and this time on March 5th, 2022, the cameras captured something extraordinary. The Endurance, perfectly preserved, sitting upright on the ocean floor, exactly where Frank Worsley said it would be. The name on the stern: Endurance, still perfectly legible after 107 years. The ship's wheel intact, the rigging preserved, even wooden crates still stacked on the deck. It was as if the ship had been waiting to tell its story one more time. The discovery made headlines around the world. After more than a century, Shackleton's ship had returned from the depths. The wreck is now a protected historical site. No artifacts will be removed. Like Shackleton's grave on South Georgia, it will remain in Antarctica forever. A monument to human courage, leadership, and the unbreakable will to survive. From 28 men trapped on the ice in 1915 to the modern explorers who refused to give up a century later, the story of the Endurance teaches us something profound. True leadership isn't measured by success. It's measured by bringing everyone home. True courage isn't about never failing. It's about never surrendering. And true endurance isn't about the ship. It's about the human spirit that refuses to break, no matter how impossible the odds. The Endurance may rest forever beneath the ice, but its story ... and the courage of the men who sailed on it will endure forever. What do you think makes a true leader? Could you survive what Shackleton's crew endured? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story inspired you, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs a reminder that no challenge is truly impossible. And don't go anywhere, subscribe and turn on notifications, because next week, we're diving into another incredible survival story that will leave you absolutely speechless. The next video is already queued up on your screen. Click it now, and let's keep exploring the most extraordinary true stories in history together. Thanks for watching. Stay curious, stay inspired, and remember, when the world tries to crush you, endure.